What is up, everybody? It is that time again. We have a new set coming out on MTGA, Bloomburrow, uh, set based off of the books Red Wall, with lots of critters and creatures, and even the planeswalkers we know get turned into creatures when they go to this plane. So it's an interesting concept, and we'll have to take a look at some of the cards and see what we think. But today we're looking at the top 10 list from this set. All of the cards have been spoiled, and I've picked my top 10 best cards. So, uh, first of all, I should preface this by saying that these are not in any particular order. And also, I didn't pick the cards that were really build around cards that need a lot of synergy. Most of the cards that I have in here today, either I think are very powerful just by themselves, or cards that have very high value, like 2-for-1 value, 3-for-1 value, things like that. So, that out of the way, let's get into it. All right, so the first card we got here is Beza, the Bounding Spring. It is 2 and a white, so 4 mana total for a 4/5. And this card just has a lot of value stapled to it. Basically, is good against every matchup, good against aggro, good against control. So you play it on 4. If you're facing an aggro opponent, they're most likely going to have more creatures than you. You're probably going to have a lower life count than them. So this is going to give you tokens, creature tokens, and gain you 4 life. And if you're playing against control, they'll probably have more lands than you and more cards than you. So this is going to give you a treasure token and draw you a card. So in both of those situations, this is a 2-for-1 value. You get a card or you get the 2 fish tokens. And so it seems pretty solid. Definitely could be good in kind of a mid-rangey shell with it being your top end. And it's always going to get you some value. So that's why this is in my top 10. All right. Next up, we have Luge, the Shoreless Sea. It's pretty hard to cast one blue, but the effects are pretty powerful. And I really just thought this card was very interesting. It would probably fit in a mono blue or maybe a Demir shell. And we've seen creatures like this a long time ago, maybe 2 to 3 years ago, where you put it in a control deck and you're pretty happy playing this on turn 5 or turn 6 as kind of like your win con finisher. And why is this one so powerful? Well, it's got scaling power and toughness based on the number of islands you have. And then whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, put a flood counter on one of your lands. And basically that gives you another island, making things easier to cast and making your creature bigger. And also, for every flood counter that you have, your first instant or sorcery each turn costs blue less to cast. So you could play this on turn 5 and have like a 2 mana counterspell, and essentially you can hold up a counterspell for just 1 mana. Also, if you get another one of these creatures later on in the game, you still have a flood counter on your land, then it's going to kind of stack, so the effect doesn't go away even though your creature died. And so you're pretty fine with them killing your first one, and you just try to get your second one down, and you get even more benefit. So I think that makes this pretty powerful and more powerful than a lot of the kind of control finishers we've seen in a little while. But it doesn't draw you any cards or things like that, so that's a little bit sad on that part. But otherwise, it seems pretty interesting and pretty cool. Next, Mabel. Mabel is a solid, just a solid red. I mean, it's the Boros card, but this is one I think of the best red cards in the set. And it's a 3/3 body for 3 mana. It acts as a lord for your other mice creatures, which there are quite a few mice in this set. And it's just a straight up 2-for-1 because when it comes into the battlefield, you get a legendary colorless equipment, which has a pretty decent effect. It gives your creature +1/+1, vigilance, trample, and haste. So most likely the play pattern is you play this on turn 3, and then turn 4 you drop a 2-drop and you equip the equipment. And now that new creature you played also has haste and is a little bit bigger and vigilant and trampling. So it's just pretty good. It's always going to be a 2-for-1, and you're pretty happy with what you get if even if you just play this card. But the fact that it's a lord for your other mice creatures makes it quite good. So I think the Mabel gets the thumbs up from this set. All right, next is Mockingbird. This is a deceptively simple card, which has a very big upside. And so it's blue for a 1/1 flying bird bard creature. I don't know why bard matters, but bird, there's some bird synergy in the set. And worst case scenario, it's just a 1 mana 1/1 flyer, which is not terrible. It's about baseline. But it has the ability that when it enters the battlefield, it can enter as any copy as a as a copy of any creature on the battlefield with mana value less than or equal to the amount of mana that you spent to cast this card, except that it's a bird in addition to its other types, and it has flying. And so if the opponent has a 1-drop and you cast this for 1, you can copy their card. You get the stats. Maybe they have a 2/1 creature on the board. You copy it. Now you have a 2/1 flying creature. So you're pretty happy with that. Their creature might have like an attack trigger, or it might have some some effect that you'll get to copy with this. So all of those are just straight upsides. And the fact that even if you don't pay an X cost, you could still copy things is pretty awesome. If you want to copy a 2-drop, you just pay 1 and a blue. You don't pay 2 and a blue. So it scales very nicely. So basically, you're always going to get the best creature that's on the battlefield with this card. And I think that makes it quite powerful. Copying the opponent's creatures is usually very good. And so the fact that the rate is also good makes this card something to watch out for. All right, next up we got the Osteomancer Adept, a 1 and a black for a 2/2, and has Death Touch. So just with that, it's pretty solid, not too shabby, and it has an effect similar to Underworld Breach, where you get to cast stuff from your graveyard by having an additional escape cost, so to speak. But the escape cost on this one is they're calling it forage, and basically you exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sacrifice a food. I don't really know if you'll have foods, but probably you'll have cards in your graveyard to sacrifice at some point. And so you can bring back creatures from your graveyard basically by paying their cost and foraging. So maybe early game you play some mill cards, some cards that are decent but also mill you, or things that you sacrificed and they go into the graveyard, or things like that. And then, later on in the game, once you've got a little bit in your graveyard, you can drop this down, or even drop it down turn 2 and try to do something turn 3 or turn 4. But, um, especially late game, if you get this when the opponent's kind of out of cards and this is your top deck, very, very nice. Because potentially you could be casting a few creatures from your graveyard in one turn, and so worst case it's removal on a stick. Best case you're getting 2 or 3 or who knows how many cards from this. So very solid, definitely very solid. All right, next up, Season of Loss. I also think this card is the best of the seasons. I didn't include any of the other ones, but it's kind of like a black sweeper, which we haven't really had in a long time. We've had some kind of not so great sweeper cards, but we had a couple 6-mana black sweeper cards, but for 5 mana, we haven't had anything super great. At least nothing comes to mind. I mean, older formats, yeah, we do, but it's not that useful in older formats. So, um, anyway, this is 5 mana, and you get to pick 5 paws worth of effects. The first effect, which is costs 1 paw, is each player sacrifices a creature. Second effect, for 2 paws, you can draw a card for each creature you controlled that died this turn. 3 paws, each opponent loses X life for X number of creature cards in your graveyard. And you can choose the effects more than once. So I think baseline, most of the time, this is going to be used in like a control deck, and you'll just choose each player sacrifices 5 creatures, and you'll essentially just remove your opponent's board. Now, maybe you have a few creatures in your control deck, so you could do something like sacrifice 3 creatures, and then you draw a card for each one of yours that got sacrificed. So that's pretty good. And actually, it just says your creatures have to die this turn. So you could swing in, get some pretty bad attacks. The opponent might block it, and then your creatures die, and then you could draw a bunch of cards from that, essentially. So, the options are pretty open for this card. It's pretty nice. And then late game, or even if you're in a creature heavy deck or a mill heavy deck, you could potentially like mill yourself a bunch, get a bunch of creatures in the graveyard, and then cast the last effect, and drain the opponent for like 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's kind of like a finisher type effect in the late game with that last part for the 3 paws. And so I think all of the options are quite good for this. Obviously, um, either you want to have some creatures or your opponent should have some creatures to get the effects of this, but most decks are creature-based decks nowadays anyway, so I don't think it's a problem. All right, next, Spell Gyre. This reminds me a lot of like Cryptic Command. It's 2 blue blue for an instant that counters a spell or surveils 2 and draws 2. I guess you could also think of it like Archmage Charm, but a standard version of Archmage Charm. And I think it's potentially very good because you want to have a 4 mana draw in most of your control decks. But this one is a 4 mana draw spell that's got a counterspell attached to it. And I guess we had like Thassa's Revelation a while ago, but it was a little bit difficult to use because it had the X cost in it. So sometimes your opponent could still pay the Thassa's Revelation cost, but this one is just straight up counter target spell, and so nobody can pay that. And then attached to that, you also have the chance to draw cards. So seems quite good, and I'd be pretty happy to play this in a control deck, especially with a luge that we had earlier, giving you discounts on your cards. All right, next up, Splash Portal. Blue, blink effect, and it's 1 mana, so that makes it pretty nice. Unfortunately, it is sorcery speed, which is a downside. First, when I read it, I thought it was instant speed, which was much nicer, but still, blue sorcery speed, exile creature returns to the battlefield, and then if you target a bird, frog, otter, or rat, you draw a card. So this is kind of like an opt, but you get some extra effect from blinking your creature as long as you have a deck that wants to blink creatures. And there's even a 2-drop creature right now in the new set that says whenever a creature gets exiled and returns to the battlefield, you draw a card. So those two work very well together. You cast this, and you essentially draw 2 cards for 1 mana. So kind of like a Charter Course or something like that. I guess even better than Charter Course. So um, it seems like it could be really, really good in the right deck. All right, next up, Tender Wild Guide. Green actually gets a lot of really good offspring cards in this new set, and I think there's a high potential that either green, mono green, or Gruul becomes a thing. Just because the power level of the green offsprings cards is very, very good, and a lot of times they'll give you mana or they'll give you like a really giant creature, and then you can duplicate it to get more mana or bigger creatures. And so I think it's going to be pretty hard to deal with green when they're kind of popping off like that. But yeah, to read this card, it's 1 and a green for a 2/2 that's a mana dork, so add 1 mana of any color. And if you don't use it for the mana ability, you can just pump it up with counters. Currently in standard, there's counter synergy with a lot of cards, so maybe you could do something with that. But otherwise, you can use the offspring ability. So when you cast this, it's kind of like kicker, I guess, basically kicker. Um, then you get another 1/1 copy of this creature. So you 4 mana, you get 2 mana dorks same turn that can grow bigger if you're not using their mana ability. But just ramping from 4 to 6 seems quite good. Um, and worst case scenario, they just become creatures that you just grow and grow and grow until you just win the game. So definitely solid. Mana dork that's not bad late game and has upside. So what's not to like here? All right, last up is Vren the Relentless. This is 2 blue and a black. It's a card very similar to Kalidas, one that we have in Historic and Timeless. Kalidas is what I mean, for a long time it was really, really good in Historic. It's definitely fallen off a little bit, but still a very solid card. And this is very similar to that. So Kalidas was also 4 mana for a 3/4. The difference is this one has Ward, Kalidas had Lifelink. I mean, I know Lifelink is pretty useful, but the rest of the card is very similar. Um, when a creature opponent would control dies, you exile it, and then at the end of your turn, for each exiled creature, you get X 1/1 black rat creature tokens that get +1/+1 for each other rats you control. So, potentially you could drop this on 4 if you feel like the opponent can't remove it. It does have Ward 2, which makes it tricky to remove. And then turn 5, you kill a few of the opponent's creatures or cast some conditional board wipe or things like that. And you're going to get a bunch of rats that get really big really fast. And so I think this is going to fit really nicely into a Dimir control shell. Um, Potentially, you drop this on turn 5 with like a cut down or something like some removal, or turn 6 with 2 mana removal. But either way, it's got a really, really powerful ability that the opponent basically has to remove or they're going to be in trouble. And that's it for my top 10. Let me know what you think. Did I miss anything? Again, there were some other cards which were very synergy based. Lots of the mouse creatures were kind of in the heroic shell. So it potentially could be very good where you target your own creatures and you get some bonus effects on your board. So that's really nice. There's also some 2 mana lords that pump your like mice and bunnies and things like that, which is cute and potentially could be good as well. But they were very synergy based, like I said, so I didn't include them in this list. Um, but yeah, let me know if there's other cards that you think are just like standalone, very solid cards. Overall, I felt the power level of this new set was a bit lower than the last one. Outlaws of Thunder Junction was pretty strong. So this one was a little bit disappointing for me. I don't really think many cards could be good in older formats. There were like maybe 1 or 2 cards that I thought, well, maybe that could be played in Legacy or something, but maybe not, nothing like for sure. So don't think anything's that powerful, but for standard, we are getting a rotation, so there's potential some of these are going to be good, and at least this top 10 felt pretty solid to me. All right, that's going to be it. We're going to have the top 5 new brews coming up soon. I may do them all in one video just because, I still have a kid and time is kind of a luxury with a small child, but we'll see. Either way, I'm going to try to bring you that content, and hope you stay tuned for that. So, till next time, God bless, have a great day, and I'll see ya.